Hello, welcome to this special presentation of News 2, Dr. Martin Luther King. His courageous and selfless devotion gave direction to 13 years of civil rights activities. His words, action, and commitment have inspired many to this day. How did it all begin for Dr. Martin Luther King? Here's more on the life of a great leader. He was the son of a preacher man born on January 15, 1929 at the family home in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin Luther King Jr. was the first son and the second child born to the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and Alberta Williams King. He attended elementary and high schools in Atlanta. Because of his high scores on college entrance examinations during his junior year in high school, he advanced to Morehouse College without formal graduation from Booker T. Washington High School. Having skipped both the 9th and 12th grades, Dr. King entered college at the age of 15. In 1948, he graduated from Morehouse with a BA degree in sociology. He enrolled in Crozer Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania, and the University of Pennsylvania, receiving numerous awards. Martin Luther King followed in his father's footsteps and entered the Christian ministry. He was ordained in 1948 at the age of 19 at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. King married Coretta Scott in 1953. And 4 children soon became part of the family. By this time, King was already a strong worker for civil rights for members of his race. He was a member of the NAACP, the National Advancement of Colored People. In 1955, a nonviolent black protest, which lasted 382 days, gained much attention. Civil rights activist Rosa Parks refused to comply with Montgomery's segregation policy on buses. King gained national prominence for his role as president of the newly formed Montgomery Improvement Association. On December 21, 1956, after the Supreme Court had declared unconstitutional the laws requiring segregation on buses, blacks and whites rode the bus as equals. During these days of boycott, King was arrested. His home was bombed. He was subjected to personal abuse, but at the same time emerged as a leader. King also experienced resistance from national political leaders, efforts to undermine. He spoke at many different places, often appearing where there was injustice, protest, and action. In 1960, black college students initiated a wave of sit-in protests that led to the formation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. King wholeheartedly supported the movement. In 1963, clashes between unarmed black demonstrators and police armed with dogs and fire hoses generated media headlines throughout the world. President Kennedy responded to the protests by submitting civil rights legislation to Congress, which led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Subsequent mass demonstrations culminated in the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom on August 28, 1963, in which more than 250,000 protesters gathered in Washington, D.C. It was on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial that he delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. King became Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1963 and recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. King's leadership was intensified during 1967 as urban racial violence escalated, and he publicly criticized U.S. intervention in the Vietnam War, which led to strained relations with Lyndon Johnson's administration. King also faced criticism from other movements, including the Black Power. Martin Luther King pushed forward nevertheless. On the evening of April 4, 1968, while standing on the balcony of his motel room in Memphis, Tennessee, where he was to lead a protest march in sympathy with striking garbage workers of the city, he was assassinated. Many were shocked. His funeral services were held April 9, 1968 in Atlanta at Ebenezer Church and on the campus of Morehouse College, with the President of the United States declaring a day of mournings and flags being flown at half-staff. James Earl Ray was arrested in London to stand trial for the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. He was sentenced to 99 years in the Tennessee State Penitentiary. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was 39 years old at the time of his passing. While on St. Thomas, every year the St. Thomas Synagogue puts the spotlight on young Virgin Islanders who have a spark of Martin Luther King's values in them. The synagogue's new rabbi spoke to News2 about this year's honorees and why they make sure they celebrate Dr. King's birthday every year.
Our annual Dr. Martin Luther King Awards Shabbat service. We've been doing this service for over a decade. It's led by myself and our Social Action Committee. And we take an evening to celebrate with the community the accomplishments of students around the high schools of St. Thomas and St. John. This evening we'll be honoring 8 students who have been chosen by their schools who embody the values of Dr. King. And they will have a moment to stand on our pulpit and speak their minds about what they believe are the issues here in our community.
When you start thinking about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the social gospel, all that he did over the years, someone like myself who grew up in South Carolina in the early 1960s, just having to deal with a lot of the Jim Crow, having to deal with a lot of the things that Dr. King spoke about. And I've been blessed to go to different parts of the country and speak. And I'm so excited to have the opportunity to come here tonight and speak and just share what Dr. King meant to all of us, being a living witness, being a testimony of what he did.
Now, the students were honored for following the footsteps of Dr. Martin Luther King at the annual Special Shabbat Awards service of the Hebrew Congregation of St. Thomas. The event draws many community leaders, government officials to celebrate the life of Dr. Martin Luther King by recognizing these students. Now, here are the students: Shaquille Prasad of All Saints Cathedral School, Joshua Farrell of Faith Christian Fellowship, Mary Alice Prosper of Shalom Ali High School, Larisma Madura of Gift Hill School on St. John, Abigail Joseph of Eudora Ken High School, Liliana Francis of St. Peter and Paul Catholic School, and Leah Trotman of VI Montessori School and PGIA. Those are some of our honorees there. And to these students on Friday, in recognition of Dr. Martin Luther King, they spoke about their dreams, described the impact his legacy has had on their lives, and in the spirit of service, made donations to local organizations that greatly help the VI community. On the middle and upper school side, students included in their morning program a day of giving, a presentation that awarded to representatives from the Hebrew Congregation of St. Thomas, Charlotte Kimmelman Cancer Institute, and the Salvation Army checks ranging from $200 to $1,148. Funds were raised by the students throughout the year through various initiatives. The program also included a student reading of excerpts from Dr. King's famous I Have a Dream speech and a discussion of the impact that this has had, the legacy has had on their lives.
We're happy to be here to represent our organizations, and we are very, very grateful that this group of students is so generous and focused so much on the values that we hold of social justice and the values of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as well.
This was a great event. The students really stepped up and showed their community service, their community involvement, and myself and other donors were happy to be here to receive the donations on behalf of the students.
We're so grateful that people can come together.
Senate President Myron Jackson said when senators met over 40 years ago to pass a bill honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., they hoped his message would inspire up-and-coming generations to soul search and follow his example. Bill number 4293 called for all to take comfort and gain encouragement from the life of this great apostle of nonviolence who sought through constructive measures justice and liberty for all mankind. The law also made history by making the Virgin Islands one of the first to pay tribute to the civil rights leader who symbolized faith and freedom. 13 years before his birthday became a national holiday. He said, "Let us reflect on the many ways in which Martin Luther King Jr. transformed lives as one of our great activists who understood the power of peaceful protest as a means of conflict resolutions." Jackson also said it is a timeless message that still rings true for us and every young person living as we seek to end the senseless killings in our community. Senator Jean Ford said a leader is not built by simply treading waters lightly or standing on the wayside, but by delving into the trenches and making the sacrifices necessary to stand for what is fair and just. Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. You have been the victims of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that Unearned suffering is redemptive. Senator Ford echoes the sentiments, he said, of Dr. King, acknowledging undoubtedly that the community has been greatly affected by the recent acts of violence in the territory. He added, "We cannot remain silent about the recent violence that has plagued our territory." However, the Democratic senator urged the community to raise its voice about not only the violence, but the social and economic conditions that are largely responsible for these acts of crimes. Well, how do many remember Dr. Martin Luther King? What kind of message still lives? We asked many of you to share your thoughts. We'll have that when we return. But right now, here's an excerpt from his most famous speech delivered on August 28, 1963 in Washington. It's called, "I Have a Dream."
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free.
Welcome back. In the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr., News2 connected Virgin Islanders who are moving forward within their respective fields and pursuits. Culinary to societal, these Virgin Islanders embody the spirit of Martin Luther King's vision of individuals striving for success while lifting their people up to new heights. Sharing the motivation behind Chef Digby at Balter Restaurant, the passion for justice for Genevieve Whitaker, and the essence of the Caribbean flavor from Frank Robinson. Here's more.
A lot of people, when they look at my career, they look at like the last 3 years and they base it on that. I mean, I've been cooking, this is 19 years this January that I've been in the business. That's from high school at the Buccaneer, that's going to school, that's failing so many times that it became the norm after a while. I think I started finding a lot of happiness when I started working for chefs that were more ingredient driven, because even though I couldn't see my cuisine through them, I could see ingredients through them. So I think when I was able to come back home, I could translate that to like what is a radish and how I could translate a radish through the eyes of a Crucian. The idea is, yes, we want to advance food, but we don't want to change it so much to where it's not our food. So I feel like as Crucians, as West Indians, we should celebrate who we are, not just through our food, but who we are as people, our culture, our traditions, and just being alive. And I think that's the beauty of the food, that it's not just nutritious, it's not just good for us, but it tells a story of who we are as people, you know, where we are in this world, who lived here, why are we in the predicaments we are in, why? You know, I think our food tells that story. I just want to see the farms come, people support the farms. I want to see the farms come alive. I think we have great farmers there, but I want to see more of it on the plate. And I know, 10 years from now, this restaurant scene is going to be different. When I take students like Rico, who spent 4 years with me while he was through Complex, graduated from Deuce, recently just left last month. He went to college. And right now, his boss called me 2 nights ago from Tuscan Trotter, which is a James Beard nominated restaurant, top class. And he says, I put him on the grill on his second night. And I couldn't believe this kid is 18 years old. Is everyone this good where you're from? And it was just a reminder that if you work hard, because that kid worked hard, and it was a reminder that we have a lot of talent here. We just got to focus in on it. If I had one visionary message to say, just keep dreaming.
From very young, I explored human rights. All in elementary school, and even when I had a chance to live in Maryland for a few years, I began learning about Native Americans and African history, and then got deeper into understanding Virgin Islands history. And interesting enough, I've always been interested in the law, so from very young also I was interested in becoming a lawyer. So I think that has always been my journey about helping others. Pretty early on in my undergrad career, being mentored by persons who were experts and who really helped me along the way in honing my interest and understanding of the human rights law and things like that. And there I really learned about the Virgin Islands and our struggle. I learned a lot about the concept of neocolonialism and the impact that now societies removed from slavery and the inhumanity that followed, and now transform into a new system, and now as we know it as neocolonialism, and even understanding now the political structure of the Virgin Islands. As millennials, we must and do appreciate the work of our forefathers and foremothers, and again in that spirit of Clady Road, Ayo Clady Road, Clady Road, let the slaves then pass. We are going for our freedom. So to my generation, on the heels and the backs of our ancestors, being inspired by their great, immense sacrifice, that we can find ourselves and make different types of sacrifices, but make ones nonetheless to see a much different Virgin Islands 50, 100 years from now.
Life is a journey, so to get where I am, I haven't reached my destination yet. I'm still on that very same journey that has brought me thus far. I love to eat, I love to drink, everybody knows that. But also, I enjoy an amazing experience. So if I can translate an amazing experience through my drinks and through my food, I feel like I'm winning. My mission in my craft is to make other people happy. The reason why I fell in love with this is that when people drink, when people socialize, hang out, and get together, it creates a true essence of joy, even in the worst of times. I find it essential to put the Caribbean essence into my cocktails, to put it into my food, to put it into anything else. And the fruits and produce, the vegetables, the roots, the herbs, the life that is produced here, I want to be able to give that back to my own people first, back to the Crucian people, back to the Virgin Islanders first. But then when people travel here, they want to experience something that comes from here. And I hope to provide that. It's really about togetherness. At the end of the day, it's all about us coming together, working together, uplifting each other, and creating a quality product not only for ourselves, but for the tourists that we rely on. But I think that if we focus on creating something that is beautiful at home, for the people at home, those who come and see that will love it more than anything else. Because we are rife with opportunity, and people are beginning to see it. But if we produce something that is uniquely local, something that is amazing from here, I think that we can all do it together. You know, my motto is everybody eats. If I eat, somebody else can eat.
Great message there. Virgin Islanders seeking new heights by pursuing their dreams while retaining their culture and heritage. Well, Dr. King was known for his strong stance on nonviolence that translated into his views on war. In 1967, during an NBC interview on the Mike Douglas Show, he defended his political views. Here's more.
Well, I think my view has been a little distorted at that point. I haven't only urged Negroes not to fight. I feel that the war is so unjust, so abominable, so futile and bloody and costly that nobody should be fighting there. I haven't limited my concern to just the American Negro, although I know we are dying in disproportionate numbers there, and we are on the losing end both there and at home, because as long as the war in Vietnam continues, social programs will inevitably suffer here at home.
Many events were held locally in recognition of Martin Luther King. The Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, Theta Epsilon Lambda chapter, they held their annual Martin Luther King March earlier today from the Enid Embar Library to Emancipation Garden. Many schools and civic organizations were there in attendance. It was presented by the distinguished gentlemen of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, Theta Epsilon Lambda chapter. A short program in the Emancipation Garden followed the march. We'll have those highlights tomorrow. Well, Dr. King has undoubtedly changed the American social landscape on massive scale, but for individuals he influenced, the man represented many different things. Here are more personal thoughts on Dr. Martin Luther King.
As we celebrate the legacy and life of Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a man who brought hope and healing to so many that felt disenfranchised. Along with so many others, Dr. Martin Luther King paved the way for us. I hold the values that he displayed dear to me because he led with example.
In my opinion, Martin Luther King Jr. Day represents a day where we remember a man that was filled with courage, with a lot of faith, with strength, that decided to use his life to advance us as African American people. In a time where the world is filled with so much racial divide, I think we should really take time out on this day to reflect on his platform and what he stood for.
Some great words there from local residents. Here's more from the historic speech, I Have a Dream.
I accept the Nobel Prize for Peace at a moment when 22 million Negroes of the United States are engaged in a creative battle to end the long night of racial injustice. I accept this award on behalf of a civil rights movement which is moving with determination and a majestic scorn for risk and danger to establish a reign of freedom and a rule of justice.
Welcome back. We thank you for joining us on this special as we recognize the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm Sandra Gumansing, and what we're going to do is leave you with some more words of wisdom from Dr. King. Be sure to tune in to News 2 at 7 and midnight on Tuesday for all the latest news, weather, and sports. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free.